All right. So this is going to be a list of questionable encounters that I've had with police over the years. Mainly, this is with South Carolina police departments and just recently with NYPD. I think I've only got one here with the NYPD, but yeah, predominantly these are with South Carolina police departments because that's where I've spent the majority of my years. Most of these incidents occurred when I was in college. So the first one actually happened when I was in college the first time at the Citadel. And I was out at Citadel North Charleston Mall. I was out on a date. A lot of these actually happened when I was out on dates, which is weird. But I was seeing a movie, and after leaving the movie, I get pulled over by a police officer. So this was a North Charleston uh, city cop that pulled me over. And he pulled me over right as I was leaving the mall area where the theater was. So it was North Charleston Mall, the movie theater there. For those of you that have been down there and that know that area, it's pretty easy to spot. It's on Rivers Avenue. So the police officer stops me and he says, "We've got a report of a guy in a Camaro that has been stealing Honda parts out of the parking lot." And he was like, "Yeah, you fit the description." So I had just come out of this movie with this girl, and I was a cadet at the Citadel, and there were no other cars in the parking lot. It was literally just like it was late, the movie theater was getting out, and it was just me in the parking lot, as in, like, my car was the only car there, and, it was just me and this girl. So, the girls are going to be like, we were in the movie the whole time, and, so long story short, they asked for my license and registration. I give it to them. They run a report. It comes back. They're like, "All right, you can go." So that was the first strange encounter. The second strange encounter happened when I was in downtown Charleston. I was on a date again, and Charleston has a lot of one-way streets. So did I go? I think I went down the street the wrong way. Because it was by a restaurant, and there was one way to get into the restaurant, and I was trying to turn and go the opposite way. So, long story short, I get pulled over, and I was trying to explain to the police officer. This is a Charleston police officer, not North Charleston, but Charleston. There is a difference. So, I was trying to explain to him that I was just trying to turn around so I could get out of the restaurant. And basically, he made a big deal and was like, "Have you been drinking tonight, etc." And I was like, "No." And this was like a really small encounter, but basically it was like the girl was saying like, "Oh, like this is what happens. This is like how they treat like black people or whatever." And to me, it wasn't that big of a deal at the time, but looking back on it, it was like kind of an inconvenience to me because like he did sort of like ask for my identification and all this stuff, and I did have a student Citadel sticker on the back of my car and like a South Carolina license plate and all this stuff. So it's clear that I did sort of belong, but he was really adamant about figuring out whether or not I had been drinking, and I had not taken a single drink. Um, the third one, this was where it got really interesting. So I was on a date again. This time it was in Columbia. I think it was on spring break or something for school. I was still in college at the Citadel, and they always pull me over when I'm on dates for some reason. But yeah, I was parked by Finley Park. Me and my date had just gone for a walk through Finley Park. And I get back in the car, and as soon as I pull off, a police officer pulls up behind me. So this time, he asked me if I've been drinking. The car has been legally parked fully in a completely legal parking space, and this guy says you were parked in the middle of the street, which I was not. I pulled forward briefly, and then he flashed his lights and pulled me over and said I was parked in the middle of the street. So, yeah, it was 2 a.m. in the morning. I was by Finley Park, and he asked me to step out of the car. After I give him my license and registration, I tell him no, and he proceeds to conduct a sobriety test on me after I have not been drinking. And the way in which he went about it was like, it was almost such that a sober person would fail. So he put a flashlight in front of my face like this, and he made me balance on, I think it was 1 foot, and he went like this, and I had to follow it with my eyes. He would put it all the way over here, and I'd still have to follow it, and then he'd go over here, and then go back, and then he would go like all the way over there, and then go over here, and he did that for about 60 to 90 seconds. So long story short, I passed, but it was really annoying. He treated the situation really aggressively, and I just felt like that was inappropriate. Um, I was staying with my parents at the time. I told them about it the next morning. This was a Columbia Police Department uh, police officer. So that was another strange encounter for me. Um, this is just kind of like a bonus. In fact, something else happened around the same time. So I was on a I was dating this girl, this woman who was working at one of my friend's mother's workplace, and she had this ex-boyfriend, and he found me through Facebook and was basically just like trying to tear into me and just saying things like, "Oh, you stupid nigger," and this and that. And I was like, "What is this?" So like, she was a white woman, and like her ex was white or whatever, and she was upset because he was like doing these things. She was like, like just ignore him or whatever. But like that was a lot of like what I had to put up with down there. So um, the next incident happened when, and I got a lot of footage on this. So I called the Richland County Sheriff's Department while in Columbia, South Carolina, and I told them, I said, I don't feel safe. So a sheriff's department police car comes, officer gets out of the car, and the officer, I tell the officer, what's going on, and I say, I'd like to be like escorted out of the home, and he was like, well, just call an Uber, this and that. So I said, all right, that's fine, but based on how my family's been treating me, etc., I just don't feel safe here right now, so I'd like to be escorted out. And he said, no, I can't do that. Uh, so this guy had his hand on his gun. He told me that I could be shot by my neighbors if I decide to walk through the neighborhood by myself. And he asked, if my parents are in the house. I said, yeah. And so he says, all right, well, let's get this whole thing handled. Let's get it sorted out. So the first thing he says once my parents answer the door is like, oh, well, we can like take him to a mental institution. So like this is obviously, see how things like progress, like from the first story to the fourth story, and here we are now. So that was, by the third point, things are a huge red flag to me. But at this point, when this is happening, this guy's like, either I shoot you, or your neighbors shoot you, or you go to this mental institution. Um, the next thing happens shortly after, with the same police department in Richland County. Um, so my dad wound up pulling a gun on me he pretty much like attacked me, pulled a gun on me, and then Richland County. Well, my mom, my mom called the police, and Richland County pretty much like surrounded me and pretty much blamed me for the entire incident. So that was, at this point, things are getting heated. Uh, Number 7 happens. All that stuff has subsided. I had been working at a job, and I went to a local bar. This is kind of like a bonus to like everything else that I've said. So I was working at a local retail store, and I went to a bar, and I would just kind of go there to like hang out, get a couple drinks, and one of the bartenders. There were 2 female bartenders. So one of them sits next to me, and I'm having a conversation with 2 of them. There are 3 total. 2 are female, and 1 is a male. So there's 1 female and 1 male sitting in front of me, or excuse me, 1 male sitting in front of me, 1 female sitting next to me. So the female bartender sitting next to me, we're having a conversation. All 3 of us are having a conversation, and I'm sitting like this. She grabs my hand from my lap, and she puts it on her shoulder. So that was a little strange, but I felt like, well, she just wants to be comforted or whatever. So at this point, the male bartender is like, "Don't touch her," this and that. So that's really weird for me. And he's like, "I'm warning you." He's like, "Don't touch her." So I was like, "Okay, whatever." But again, she put my hand on her shoulder. Um, I'm trying to remember the name of the bar. I can't remember the name of the bar, but it's close to the stadium. It's close to the USC Gamecock Stadium. It's like in the back. It's tucked in the back. A lot of people go there. It's kind of like for an older crowd. But anyway, when I say older crowd, I mean like older than college kids. So anyway, um, yeah, so that happens, and then something else occurred, and basically he just like threatened me, this male bartender, and told me to leave. So that situation was interesting. This has nothing to do with the police, but it's more about like the mentality of the surrounding community and what they're willing to do. So that happened. Um, oh, I didn't talk about this. So before that happened, uh, I went after Richland County surrounded me and pretty much forced me to go to this mental institution. And at this point, the doctor's like, there's nothing wrong with you. And they're trying to discharge me and say, well, you can go back home. And I'm like, I don't want to go back home because my parents are putting me in a weird situation. Um, the first thing I did when I got out, was I went to the Richland County Sheriff's Department to file a report. When I filed a report, I tried to do it against the entire Sheriff's Department for what they did. And the first person I talked to, he was like a black officer. He was about my age, and he told me to like go in the back room with him or whatever. And he had his gun and his badge, and he pretty much just like laughed in my face. And these were his words. He said, "If you wouldn't have thrown your phone down, then your dad would not have lunged at you, punched you in the face, and pulled a gun on you." That makes no sense to me because, me destroying my own piece of property has nothing to do with being physically assaulted and having my own life threatened. But that is exactly what he told me. So, long story short, I talked to someone else. I talked to a higher up within the sheriff's department, and they said, well, instead of filing a report against the whole department, you need to file a report against the first sergeant because he's the one in charge of this whole operation. So I said, whatever, whatever the best course of action is. So he said, yeah, just blame it on the first sergeant. And looking back on it, this is probably a way to, um, how do you put it? This is probably a way to like delegate the responsibility onto like the leadership. But I'm pretty sure the first sergeant had nothing to do with what was going on. I'm not even sure if the first sergeant was there when all this stuff took place. Really, how I felt was that the officers who handled the situation should be sort of held responsible because it was clear that they were not interested in helping at all. So the next incident happened in Rock Hill. I was in school again. I was at Winthrop, and again, a lot of these incidents have to do with women. Um, so I was talking to this one female student who I had just come back from work. I was working at a car dealer. I was talking to this one female student, and she was saying that she pretty much wanted to have sex. And we kept in contact for a little bit. I went to her room a couple times when I was bored, but I didn't really engage with her sexually. I just had talks with her. And the conversation took a weird turn at one point. Like she was telling me weird stuff. She was saying like she was from Canada and how like her like stepdad was like in the mob or whatever. And I was like, I don't really care about that. I don't want to hear about that stuff. But yeah, that was when the conversation took a weird turn for me. And then the next weird thing that happened was when she said to me, I was going through all this weird stuff with Winthrop, which, by the way, more footage is definitely coming on that. But yeah, this was going on around the same time where Winthrop was choosing to treat me uh, poorly and pretty much not take my word for anything. Um, she said, you should just move on and just get over it. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. If justice isn't handled properly, then I'm not going to just roll over and just be like, oh, it's fine. So her words were, you're just being a little bitch about it. And she was like, if you were my child, she was like, I would slap you in the face. And she was like, what would you do if I did that? And I was like, I'd hit you back. And, that was just kind of like where we were at in the conversation. The conversation kept going from there, but that was a notable point, and I'll explain why. So I'm pretty sure that same night, I had gone back up to my room for a couple hours, and it was about 1 a.m. in the morning, and I said, I'm pretty hungry. So there was no food in the apartment that I was staying in. I said, let me go up to the Waffle House. So I went to the Waffle House, sat down, decided I would order some food, and two Rock Hill Police Department patrol cars, big Chevy Tahoes, about 2017 Chevy Tahoes, they pull up. And the officers step out of the car. They have a ride along with them who looks to be about the age of another student. And so they show up, and the Waffle House has about, I'd say, two or three other customers in there. And the police walk right up to me, ask for my identification, and I say, why are you bothering me? And they said, these are their words. They said, we have a report of a domestic violence situation somebody punched their girlfriend in the face. So that was pretty weird for me. And so, I gave them my student ID and I said, look, oh, I'm sorry, no, this didn't happen the same night. This happened the next night. So I handed them my student ID and I said, this is where I'm coming from, and I've been there all night. So um, that was really strange for me. And I say, like, what was this guy? What does this guy look like, or whatever? And I was wearing a USC hoodie, like a garnet red Gamecocks hoodie, and black sweatpants. And they said, he was wearing dark clothes. And I said, well, was he wearing a red hoodie and driving a red Camry? And they said no. And I said, so why are you stopping me? Out of everybody else in the restaurant, you have people in the restaurant who are actually wearing dark clothes, and you're choosing to stop me. And they said, we don't know, whatever. So long story short, I followed them back out and I like yelled at him. I was like, don't do this again. Because, it's weird for me. It's a weird coincidence that I would have a conversation with that same girl and then the police come and say, they pretty much come at me and say, you fit the description of this person that they probably just made up. I don't know. But right after that, I went to the headquarters and talked to a supervisor. And the supervisor came out, hand on his gun. It's important that I note that. Yeah, supervisor came out, hand on his gun, and said, sometimes we make mistakes. That is not. That's not an excuse. That's not an appropriate excuse for me. So, a lot of weird encounters with police over the years. This timeline of events this is about a 7-year run. Most of these are with South Carolina police departments again. The last incident happened actually when I got to New York. I was having some trouble with first roommate I moved in with. He's from the Ukraine. He's from Ukraine, and this guy pretty much said things like, "Oh, bring home rotten food and like rotten fruits and vegetables, rotten meat and whatnot." And he said he was going to cook like cannibal meat and rat meat. And pretty much he started like um, coming on to me, like expressing like sexual advances, homosexual advances. And I felt really uncomfortable with that. He was saying things like, you should be like a male escort and things of that nature. So I said to myself, well, this guy is providing me with a living space and he's basically making the living conditions inhumane, but also he's trying to coerce me into situations that I don't want to be in. So I said the most rational thing to do is go to the police. So I go to the police, NYPD, and the NYPD does everything they can to make it so that I cannot file a report. And this guy, my roommate, is like, well, you should be locked up 24/7. You should go to an insane asylum, and you should. He was just saying like all this crazy stuff, and just making it like really difficult for me. And at one point, he even accused me of something that was not true. Um, I was at work, and we had the time that I had spent in the apartment that day. We had been within each other's line of sight the whole time. So when I come back from working, he stayed in the apartment. He says, "Oh, did you touch my laptop?" So he pulls out his laptop, and there's a smudge on the screen. And he says because of the smudge, the whole laptop doesn't work. So there's one other person living in the apartment, but he automatically asked me. He says, I'm gonna just assume it was you. I'm gonna blame it on you. I say, it wasn't me. He said, oh, so it wasn't you? He said, oh, well, it must have been a ghost. So he's taking it to a really extreme stance here. He's saying like either it was you or, like the sky is red, that sort of thing. And of course, I'm like, no, this isn't true. So I go to the police at this point. I'm like, look, this guy's accusing me of things that aren't true. He's saying he's bringing home cannibal meat, rat meat. He's saying he's bringing home rotten meat, etc. My roommate's laughing because the situation is so ridiculous. My new roommate, but yeah, the police pretty much, they're like, it sounds like you're just not getting along with him, and we're not going to let you file a report. So they say, I don't know how he's laughing. This is not funny. Like it's not funny when you're in the situation. Like all these things that I'm saying are insane. Like honestly, I'm at a point where I'm like, I think police departments in this country are like their own gang. Like what are y'all doing out there? Anyway, so the NYPD, their words were, "Oh, well, it sounds like you're not getting along with your roommate. You should move out." So I said, "All right." They say, "Yeah, go to a homeless shelter." Uh, or that I tell them like, this guy's like saying like I should be a male escort. I'm like, that's sex trafficking. They're like, oh, it's just a suggestion. It's just a suggestion. So they say, we could suggest that you go like work at GameStop or whatever. You don't have to take the suggestion or whatever. And like that is just not only is that like unprofessional, but that is like, imagine if I take the police advice and I say like, oh, I'm gonna go to a homeless shelter. Like if you want to talk about corruption, I mean these guys. I said in another video before, the badge doesn't make the man makes the badge. If they're gonna act this way, they deserve every little bit of what's happened to them with this Black Lives Matter stuff. And I said in the last video, I don't agree with the way that the protesters and the rioters handled things, or I'm sorry, I wouldn't have handled it the same way that they handled it, but I do understand. Um, so that's been my experience, all 9/10 of them. By the way, we got a dog. Hush. Okay. Yeah, all 9/10 of the questionable encounters with police over the years, from about 2013, 14 to all the way in 2020. So between 6 and 7 years. That's my experience. Let me know what you guys think. I know I got bedhead and unshaven, unkept. Anyway, drop a like, leave a comment, subscribe. Let me know what you guys think.